Good evening and welcome back to The Reckoning. We are so excited. The Reckoning is our digital publication of CMP, better known as the Counter Narrative Project, and we are so grateful to have those of you who are able to join us. Please feel free to comment in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We really appreciate it. Definitely make sure that if you are not doing so, follow CNP at CNP Tribe everywhere. And you definitely want to go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. My name is Johnnie Kornegay, and I am proud to serve as Deputy Director for Strategy and Impact with CMP. And I'm so happy to be here to help us get through this interesting conversation that we are about to have. But before we jump into things, I'm going to ask that my colleagues introduce themselves so you can know a bit about them. So, Deion, I'll ask you to jump in.
Yes, sure. Thank you for the handoff. Good evening, everybody. My name is Deion Hawkins, and I am the senior editor of The Reckoning at the Counter Narrative Project.
And I am Thandiwe DeShazor. I am the program director at the Counter Narrative Project.
Thank y'all so much. So let's jump into the discussion. So Deion, the genesis of this conversation really started with you. And we were in another meeting, and you said something that was kind of really important for us to remember, how, we are existing all over this country, right? And it was just like, we need to remember that. We need to talk about this as an important tool, but I'm not going to set it up. I'm going to ask you, Deion, to tell us a bit about, where you were when this kind of epiphany happened, and what was the epiphany as we walk through tonight's discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give the brief, as brief as I can version. So I'll work backwards. So the kind of big takeaway for me was that I think that a lot of people feel that there is a obligation to live in like a major coastal city if you're Black and queer, and or the only way to be authentic or liberated as a Black gay person is living in kind of a larger, bigger city. And again, and for me, it doesn't seem that it's just major cities. It does seem that it's tied to like coastal type things, right? So DC's, LA, New York, Philadelphia, not like Chicago, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it popped up because I had the privilege of attending the Black Queer Studies conference in early April. And a big convo that came from there was that something can be like universally needed, but concentrated in a certain place. So the big takeaway from that was that, yes, we need Black queer liberation internationally. Yes, we need it clearly in America. But if we are to accomplish that, it likely means we need to center what that looks like in the South, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's where a lot of power, representation. That was kind of a takeaway that I had independent. Then it just so happened when my family went to visit DC to visit the African American History Museum to take my grandma. And I had really back to back conversations with colleagues in Boston and friends in DC that kind of kept saying like, oh, well, I don't understand why people would live there. And I don't understand, why they wouldn't move, etc. And I kept saying, well, that's their home. Like that's
Right.
where they feel that's like they feel connected to. So yeah, I'll stop there because there's a lot more I could go into, but that's kind of what nudged it, the thought.
Yeah. So the reason why thank you, Deion, for sharing that context and talking about the kind of the idea and why it's important. As a person who am currently living in the small town that I grew up in. I live in and I was raised in Chester, PA. Now, baby, I did not ever think I was coming back here. That's why this conversation is so important to me, right? And the reality of living here is there have always been queer people present in the city, right? Some that I have known, others that I got to know like later on in life, including family members, right? But there were never there was not like queer things here in the city. Like there was no bars or anything like that. And I know people are like, but you live close to Philly, right? And I'm like, but Chester's different, right? We're 20 minutes outside the city. If you get on the train, you're 45 minutes on the train, right? So it's a distance, right? And it's a commitment to go into Philadelphia. And quite frankly, there are a lot of folks from here that don't go there, right? But what's also important about the experience is we are here, living here with our families, with our lives, and living out in full experiences. And being able to like do what it is that we do in this place. So it definitely happens. I want to bring you into the conversation, Thandi, to talk a bit about how this kind of conversation relates to you, because you're also from a place where this applies.
Absolutely. I'm from the Midwest. I'm originally from Oak Park, Michigan,
Yes.
which is just outside of Detroit. So literally, 2 miles outside of Detroit. And it's so interesting that you're talking about this migration idea, because when I came out, Detroit is one of the blackest cities in America, and Detroit has one of the first black prides came from Detroit.
Mm.
Detroit's hotter than July. So I had a community when I came out and discovered the black queer community, because I was a suburban boy when I first came out, and then I found the brothers, and I was like, oh, and they found me too, and it was all love. And I joined the board of Black Gay Pride. I joined the volunteer to Black Gay Pride. I joined the board of Karibu House, one of Kofi Adoma's uh, organizations, the Ruth Ellis Center. I was heavily involved with them, and so there was no. I wasn't missing any of the Black queer community. However, I did feel the lure
Mm.
of moving to the coast. So when I turned 25, I moved to Oakland, California. I moved to Oakland, California, and working as an artist really got sunk my teeth into it. But Oakland is kind of a tropical Detroit. It really is in so many ways. Like, um, so many ways is a tropical Detroit. But at the same time, I'm grateful for my time there. But I will say that I stayed there for like 7 or 8 years, but there was something about the grit of the city that was missing that I did not have in California. Um, I enjoyed it. I had a lot of opportunities, grew as an artist, and was involved in the Black queer community there as well. Was on the board of Oakland Pride when I was out there. So I was just as involved, but there is this aspect of like, hey, coming home is super important, and there are enough of us here at home so that I didn't feel like I thought I was missing something, but then when I got there I was like, oh no, I had it here, I had it at home. So yeah, I love this conversation.
Yeah, and thank you so much, because Tanya just hit something. So I always tell people like find the nuance, right? And I think this is a perfect conversation of that, because I think what Tanya is saying. So it's not as easy as like a one or the other, because obviously for those that may seek certain types of employment, certain types of opportunities, right, that is somewhat tied to living in a different place, right? So art, etc. I'm not a hypocrite. I live in Boston now, but I live in Boston because I'm in higher education, and there really is hard to find a better city than Boston if you want to kind of turn levers of higher ed. The difference, though, is I feel and I try my best not to critique or think differently about people that I know who are Black and queer who chose to stay in Indiana, right? Because that may be what they wanted to do. They may not have ever wanted the quote unquote big city experience. Because I'm also from Indianapolis, Indiana. So it is a bigger than what people think. So I need
Mhm.
folks to put some respect on my Midwest city's name. But it is still not like a larger type city. But I do think it's important, like that nuance. If we, a lot of us, it may be education, it may be job. I do think that starts to be a little different than people are saying, like, well, you can only be your true self in a coastal city.
Mm-hmm. So this brings up an interesting question. And Tandi, you got to this because I also, so growing up in Chester, even though it is a coastal city, right? Like I'm right here outside of Philadelphia. I'm near the things, right? However, my dad said to me, "We always knew you'd leave." Like it was very clear to him that I was going to grow up and go out into the world and like do things not here, right? And that was something that he was fully prepared for. So I do, and when I thought about leaving, my first idea was I'd end up in New York because that's where I feel like if you're like queer and on the East Coast, you go to New York. Even though Philly is right there, even the Philly kids are like, no, you go to New York. So it's like, and I went to school in Philly. So it wasn't like Philly was like home, you know? Go to New York. But interesting, so I ended up landing, when I did leave, I landed in the Detroit area. So I moved to Michigan. But the lure was to go to like New York first because that was where the art was happening. That was where the music was happening and all of this stuff. So I wonder if part of this, the why this happens, is because all of our media, so much has been created in those places, right? And Deion, I think we talked about this offline. So much of our history has been birthed in these places. So when we're consuming them, it's like, oh, they were living in New York when they created this thing, or this activism happened in this place, or in Washington D.C., right? So it's just kind of like we go where we feel like we can build a life, right? At first, and then to Tandi's point, you realize like, oh shoot, once you get to that place, like, oh, I had this at home, right? So I am wondering though, is part of the reason that we end up doing this is because everything around us tells us we need to go to these places?
110%. So I again, I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this without
Say
making
it.
it contradictory.
Okay.
So I do think, so it would be not true, literally like incorrect to say that cities on the coast were not like key to advocacy, whether that be like gay marriage, whether that be HIV advocacy, right? San Francisco, New York, etc. So we do know like that is true. But what my argument has always been, or really my perspective now, is that yes, that is true, but my guess is there was small pockets of things happening in rural communities, small pockets of things happening in what people call flyover states, etc., that may not have just received as much attention. That doesn't mean that like their micro advocacy at the local level, etc., wasn't working. It's just, of course, the big media markets. That would even be the case here, like now, right? Like, let's say a massive mobilization happened in, let's say, Montana, North Dakota, right?
Mm-hmm.
We likely wouldn't hear about that living on the East Coast if there was a similar thing happening in New York and Philly. And so I just think a lot of it is the filter of like what narratives or who we think is worthy of that being told. Yeah, and I'll throw it to Tanya because I don't want to hog the mic.
No, you are absolutely right. I think it is about who is telling the story. I worked for, when I was in Michigan, my first job, my first professional job was working for the gay and lesbian newspaper. And it was called Between the Lines. And I was the only Black person on staff at that time, but that's part of the reason I kind of got connected with the Black people in the city because they needed, a face. They needed, and it ended up working out for my benefit. But I was a part of so many different movements because they were just happening. They weren't getting the necessary national attention. So you're absolutely right about that. There were so many things that were happening around that first wave of gay marriage, that first wave of anti-LGBT things in the media. The first time Kim Burrell said something negative about gay folks in the late 90s, or those were the types of times where it was like, oh, these were they were happening, but they weren't on the major radar. So you're absolutely right about that. It is who's in the driver's seat that makes an impact. Yes.
Go
And
ahead, D.
and I also, now that we're saying this out loud, I really do think kind of a underlying thing here is a lot of it is not even it's about, like, to me, seems like access to it. So it's like, for me, for example, similar to you, Johnny, I think my family was like, "You're not staying in Indiana," right? They're like, "You're going to be out of here." Um, but I always tell people now, to this day, I would 110% move back to Indiana now.
Right.
This version of me now,
Yes.
because the East Coast cost of living, and it ain't it. 'But I also just wanted to say is, it seems like for a lot of us, we found a niche or something that took us or took us to a coast or major city, or like kept us there. And again, I think for me, the reason why I get so passionate about this is I'm a first generation college graduate, right? And so, but let's say someone doesn't have access to these opportunities, or let's say someone may not just be, quite frankly, they may not be the best at school, right? That doesn't mean that they don't have the right to be as liberated or as
Yes.
authentically themselves as someone else that has a doctorate who lives on a coastal city. That's my disconnect that I feel like happens sometimes in the community, is the judgment of it.
I want to stay there for a second. So Deion, when you brought this topic up, the thing I kept thinking about is how these ideas are just another way to kind of separate us. Like, we end up pairing ourselves off with yet another thing, like where you're from. And what this brings up for me, a couple of years ago, on my podcast, I realized something as we were talking about country music. And I was having a conversation, and I was like, at some point, and this is how white supremacy works, right? Being country, considered country, quote unquote, is not something that folks from the North wanted to be associated with, right? You just didn't want to be associated with the country. And country didn't just mean in the South. Country was anything outside of these big metropolitan cities, right? And that is just another tool to keep us divided, right? And the sooner that I started to travel, I lived in the Midwest, I lived in the South, you know what I'm saying? And was able to, like, not only live and experience and just have some of the most brilliant minds around me all the time, brilliant and creative. You realize, like, oh, everything they told you was wrong. Right? Life is just different here, but life here is life here. You know what I mean? And so I do think the reason why it's important for us to break this down is because it just becomes another tool of division. The sooner we realize that just because somebody is from somewhere doesn't make them any less brilliant. You know what I mean? And it's really important that we just don't do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It makes me think, growing up, Bama was a slur.
Bama was a slur.
It's a
Remember?
slur. You would
Yep.
call somebody a Detroit Bama or a
Yep.
country Bama. And it was, but the funny thing is that both of my grandparents migrated from Alabama. And that was something where, it was a division. I married a man from the Alabama.
Right.
I realize how close those roots are to me and how much it feels like home now. Every time I go and visit that side of his family, which is now my family, it feels like home. It feels like home for my daughter. It feels like it's just natural going back to those grounds, and it divides us so much more than it needs to. So you're
Mm,
absolutely right.
mm,
Yeah, and I'll be happy to chime in here too. So I think it's important for me to give a little bit of context because I've jumped around quite a bit in my 35. Well, post college because I stayed in the same place in Indiana for 18. So I've lived in Indianapolis, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio to West Virginia to Texas, which was Marshall, Texas. So again, not a major
mhm.
city, so it was a somewhat rural area. Then to DC area, lived in Fairfax, which is a very wealthy white suburb, and then lived in PG County, which is where the black folks, I was
Yes.
gonna say,
All the
which is
black folks is
literally,
there.
yeah, I was gonna say, which is statistically one of the wealthiest
Yep.
majority black counties in the country. Now I lived in Boston. And I say that because I genuinely have just encountered a lot of different people, cultures, concepts of like safety, concept of queerness, where people find safety in queerness. And I really can't reiterate this enough how true what you're saying is, because I think it's a trickle down of other things, right? So it's like if black queer people have this socialization or their mindset all the time, then of course I'm not going to want to be. You're like, I'm already black and gay now. I can't possibly be associated with a place that people also think is backwards,
Yep.
right? And it is so true that, and if folks are listening and you are born and raised on the coast, my apologies, but I hold everyone accountable. People that have been born and raised in major cities on the coast, right? So the phrase coastal elites was taught to me when I moved here,
Mm,
really do seem to have a fundamental disinterest and borderline disdain for other parts of the country.
mm,
And I think that you have the right to disagree with how states interact politically or things like that, but that is not always a reflection of what the black queer people are doing there. And I'll last thing I'll say, and we'll jump to the next question, is I always tell I hear this with students all the time. Is I'm like, okay, what so let's say someone from a rural place says, I'll never go to a city because it's unsafe and there's just too much sin, too much debauchery, right?
mhm.
We would critique that and be like, okay, well, let's get some nuance there. But no one seems to say that when someone from the coast is like, why would anyone ever visit Louisiana? Why would anyone ever visit
Right.
Iowa? Why would anyone ever visit Indiana? And I'm like, well, lots of reasons. I'm like, you don't get
Yep.
to judge.
Yep. Yep. So it's so interesting that you mentioned that, and this is you would often where I grew up. There were so many slurs about the continent of Africa that if you were called any such a thing, it became like a really big thing. And it wasn't until once again, it wasn't until I got older and started to travel the world and like see things that you realize, oh snap, I have to unlearn all of these things that are just kind of ingrained in you, which is one of the reasons. And I know that jonesing or burn, and we call it up here burning on people, black folks, it's a skill. You learn how to do it. And queer folks, we're going to read down, like these are skills that you develop. But I've also learned to have pause when this happens, because oftentimes when that happens, we're also using these tropes that continue to divide us as a way to like dig at us too, right? So I just wanted to say that. But Deion, I want you to bring in something because I find this fascinating. So, one of the areas of the country that I have not spent a ton of time in, and I'm working on it because there's music and food and things I just need to experience, is like the Appalachians. So, like West Virginia, and we had neighbors 2 doors from me where I grew up that moved from West Virginia. So there's a picture of me with the folks these kids that we used to play with too, but they moved to Chester, PA from West Virginia. So I have a concept of life there, but none from a queer perspective. And I've always wondered, every time I look at a documentary that's like West Virginia based, I'd be like, I wonder how what's queer life there? Like, what are Black queer folks in West Virginia doing? I'm gonna just use that as an example. What was your experience? Because you spent time there.
Yeah. So I will say that I think it's important to also contextualize when and where when this happened. So this would have been 2000. Sorry, I got lost. 2012 to 15ish. And I did it, and I was completing my master's degree there, and so Huntington's for West Virginia is big, but for other places it's relatively small, about 50,000. It's the second largest city in West Virginia. And people are always, I think, a little shocked when I say that I didn't feel unsafe. Now racism, yeah, that's a whole other thing, child. See, we know intersectionality is a thing, yes, but I genuinely felt like queerness was kind of protected, and there were places that we could go, right? There were solid bars that we could go to, and I tell people this all the time. I would frequent the same amount of gay bars in Huntington, West Virginia from 2012 and 2014 as I do in Boston in 2025. So I think that, again, for so many smaller places, it develops out of necessity, and there are people that stay there to kind of cultivate, harvest it, etc. And yes, we know that there are other macro level things wrong, but again, my delineation is that's their choice to stay there, their choice to carve out that safe space. And I wanted to make sure, because I like to speak with receipts and facts. I don't like to leave anything up with conjecture. So I looked up each city has a scorecard as it relates to kind of queer protections from Human Rights Campaign. And the city of Huntington, West Virginia, where I did my master's, actually has 100 out of 100, and only is behind Boston 5 points on the scale. So again, it's like, I think sometimes there's a disconnect between the reality of lived experience in some of these places and the reality elsewhere. Now, there wasn't a lot of Black queer liberation, I would say, right? There wasn't a place that I would say I would go into a spot and see more than 10, 15. But again, my nuance here is that's true for me now in Boston.
Right.
Now, that may not be true in other major cities, but that's true here for me.
It's interesting. So being back here in this area, I do still feel like, I mean, I don't have no problems with this. I lived in Atlanta for a long time, in the Detroit area, so it's fine. But I do feel like there is a segregation in the queer community. So like the Black folks do Black folk stuff, and you know what I mean. And it's just a part of the experience, right? But I want to get some thoughts from you both, right? So if you could have it your way, what do you think the possibilities are for us if we let some of this go? And there was an interest, there's a person who made a comment with regard to accent that I think is all wrapped up in the conversation that we have, because part of this is you judge people and where they from how they sound or what their accent might be. Saying all that to say, what are the possibilities if we move closer to full acceptance of us from wherever we are, right? What are the possibilities in that for us from your perspective?
I don't want to say just more authenticity, because that sounds like a cop out, but I really do think that that's it. And I will say, almost, I will say better. I don't want to say outward image, but I think there is a beauty of being kind of cohesive and collective as a group, and that it becomes exponentially harder for like other people to break it. And I think what's hitting me is how much so much of this seems to be tied directly to like white supremacy.
Mm,
So it's like, would the South likely be demonized, or the Southern accent be demonized, if it were majority white folks who were allowed to have, you get what I'm saying? Like, now that you say it, I'm like, is it tied to what people think is like quote unquote slave dialect or country
mm-hmm.
speaking? It starts to be like, oh yeah, now this is real. This is a little more
Yeah.
worrisome than
Mm-hmm.
than what I think, because I think a lot of it is too. We talked about this, Johnny. For me, I think a lot of it is tied to attainment of jobs too,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like often being able to go to a coast, right? You will have a better job, a higher paying salary, some out of necessity, but also some, it does give you a little bit more disposable income than you may have in like other places. And so I think that also, again, is just recognizing that that may be what you desire. You may have desired that, but some people say, I'm okay making this amount. I don't want to take a risk. I don't want to move to this. So I just, for me, the beauty or the opportunity is just really letting Black queer people be authentic wherever, and like not critique where that may be.
100%. I absolutely agree. I think that I would love to see more authenticity. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. It makes me think about how so much of this is related to like class,
Mm-hmm.
or what we consider class. I remember, we recently had uh, flown someone in from a different city, and the first thing we recognized, or I recognized, was, oh, they're dressed in a very different way
Mm-hmm.
than you're wearing, colors that say
Mm-hmm.
I am here, that we wouldn't really do in Atlanta, or we
Right.
wouldn't do in New York or LA. And that's a clear, it was something that was clear, but stepping away from a judgment space and just allowing people to just be is a part of, like, you know, it's so easy to just be catty and go to that low space.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if we if we do take away those divisions, there, that leaves a space for so much more authenticity. It leaves a space for so much love, and seeing my brother or sister, whoever, seeing my fellow Black person as just another wonderful human being that's a part of my experience, and I can learn from you. And the joy that you walk into the room with, that you're not worried about other
Yes.
people, what other people think in a certain way. There's also this whole thing of, we come into, if you live in a big city, you bring those walls in of like,
Yes.
oh, because there's a sense of judgment, because we come in with that armor.
As I've aged and as I've traveled, right, that excites me is I love getting to experience folks where they are and just like watch. I love just kind of the experience of like getting in the car and like driving and seeing what the neighborhood gives. I am always, when I'm traveling, asking people like where to eat. Like, and I'll be like, no, 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 like for real. Like, where should I go and eat? Tell me where you would go and eat. You know what I mean? Because I want to go there, right? Um, Saying all that to say, going back to the question of possibilities, I feel like we would learn, we would be so much more connected to ourselves and our truth if we saw in all of us, wherever we existed and are coming from, ourselves in each other, right? And I feel like that's what this is really about. It's like putting down the wall of like all of this, I'm from here and therefore, I am this person, just seeing yourself in this other person. They just happen to be from another place. I had as an aside, I visited Jackson, Mississippi for the first time in 2017. I will put the pictures from that trip in the description so folks can check them out because it's actually kind of dope. But I remember visiting Jackson, Mississippi for the first time and being like, why does it feel like I've been here before? And I tell people this story all the time of like, I don't know who in my past life, in my spirit realm, lived in Jackson, Mississippi, but somebody that's living up in here lived there, okay? Because when I was there, I'm like, do I know this place? Like, I don't understand. And I've just leaned into, you probably do. And seeing ourselves in each other from wherever we are matter. And it doesn't matter where you come from, where you are. If folks choose to stay, if folks choose to leave. I left and child, look, God done brought me, I'm spinning the block on my home, my hometown. Never thought that would happen. And I'm so grateful to your point, Deion, that you made earlier in this conversation. I'm glad that I can live here now. With the experience, the life experience and the person that I am and all of that, I'm good. I can handle it. You know what I mean? But I feel like we can miss out on some beautiful brilliance by keeping these walls up the way that we do sometimes.
I agree. So that what you just said, one of my friends taught me a great colleague that's a professor taught me a great phrase that says something can be new but feel familiar, and that sounds like that's like literally sounds like exactly what you just experienced. I lost my train of thought from what I was going to say. How'd you end your last?
I ended in how folks, wherever they are, if they choose to stay or they choose to leave. I talked about spinning the block on my hometown.
Yeah, so this is what I also, when it's popped up with my friends, I said, so am I understanding this correctly, that you all are advocating that Black queer people only live in major cities on the coast? Like, is that the implication? Like, and when I said it that way, they were like, well, no. I'm like, exactly. I'm like, there has to be pockets of people willing to stay and do quote unquote like the hard work in these places that some of us fled or chose not to live. You get what I'm saying? Like, and so that to me again is my disconnect. Is I'm like, oh, okay. So then what happens to those places? Like, so it's just like, so is the idea like we never want to be liberated or safe in those other places?
That's real. Oh, you on mute. Hold on. Yeah. Yeah. You both are so brilliant. Thank you all so much for engaging in this conversation, and thanks for the folks that were able to tune in. Before we head out, are there any finals that we want to leave folks with? Tanda, you got something? Deion, you got something?
Yeah, I really think, and this whole conversation has really made me think about like the genuine love I have for Black people. I chose when it was time to move to the Bay Area, I chose Oakland. I did not choose San Francisco. I chose Oakland because I knew Black people were there. And I knew that's where I needed to be. When I moved to New York, I moved to Brooklyn. I moved to Bed-Stuy because at the time it was a city full of Black
time, people. Right?
I'm just saying. But I mean, I think that when you have a genuine love for Black people, it shows, and you find what I love is the connection of the diaspora. There are things that we do across the country, across the world. There's the way we look at each other. If I'm on the train and there's a or a glance across the aisle of a train that no other culture, you could be from Grenada and I could be from Detroit, but there's a glance that we share if we see some stuff going on.
Foolishness going on. You're like, we having a whole conversation with each other.
Absolutely. And that is indicative of Black people. And I love that about us. And when so when I think about, when you ask about what can be created if we bring those walls down, I think about more moments like that. Only maybe they're spoken. Only they don't necessarily have to be unspoken on the other side of the aisle. I would so much love for us to shake hands and sit together and be in community. And I think that, if we is a part of breaking down those walls, doing those things overtly, though expressing that connection overtly is a part of what I would love to see.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll round out by saying that for me is, for those of us that may be from, smaller city, etc., is that if we really are kind of passionate about, or really want to think about what the liberation narrative change, etc., looks like, again, I do think that it is imperative that we recognize that locations don't have a monopoly on what a narrative should be. And if we really think about how narrative change works, the minds of people in major cities may agree with us, right? That may not be where a lot of the work or narrative change has to happen. And so I would just I just caution people of having the judgment as element is my big takeaway. I think it makes sense for people to do what makes them happy, safe, fulfilled, uh, economically, physically, etc. But that doesn't mean that other people can't have that same feeling elsewhere.
Mm. Thank you so much, Dr. Deion Hawkins and Thandiwe DeShazor, for being here on the Reckoning Roundtable this evening. And thanks to the folks that were able to tune in. We really appreciate y'all. If you are not doing so, if you could see our faces and hear our voices, go ahead and subscribe wherever you are. So then that way you can get notified when we have upcoming live events and all the other things. Make sure that you are following CNP on social media at CNP Tribe. Everywhere you can think of. Make sure you visit our website at thecounternarrative.org. Also, join our newsletter. And last but definitely not least, you need to be checking out our digital magazine, The Reckoning, where we are talking about all things Black folks, Black queer folks, both here in video, as well as all of our articles. There's some amazing articles there that you need to check out, and that can be accessed at thereckoningmag.com. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next time. Peace, y'all.